Home Studio Start podcast.
All right, if you're on a mission to make your music sound incredible, like right from your home studio, you are definitely in the right place. Welcome to The Deep Dive. We're part of the Home Studio Start podcast, and our whole goal is simple: home recording made easy.
That's it. And today we're tackling something super crucial for getting that pro sound: equalization, EQ. Our deep dive today is actually fueled by this really great article from Rodrigo Marquez's blog, Home Studio Start. It's called Mastering Track Equalization: Essential Mix Techniques Unveiled. And Rodrigo, he really breaks down how to make your individual tracks sound, well, not just good, but really exceptional.
Yeah, and for you, our amazing listener, our mission here is to give you that knowledge you can actually use. Like right away, we want to kind of demystify EQ, hand you the practical tips, maybe even spill a few insider secrets, so you can really sculpt your sounds with precision. We promise we'll take these concepts, which can seem kind of complex sometimes, and make them super clear, help you transform your mixes from like muddy and confusing to clear and magical, ready to jump in.
Absolutely, let's do it.
Okay, so let's kick things off with the absolute basics. Understanding frequency ranges. Think of frequencies as kind of like the DNA of sound, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're split into these different ranges, and each one has its own vibe, its own sonic character, even affects emotion. Why is getting this so fundamental for good mixing?
Because, well, it's basically your map of the sonic landscape. If you don't know where things usually sit, you're kind of mixing blindfolded. Let's start down low. The low frequencies, we're talking typically like 20 hertz up to maybe 250 hertz. This is your foundation, your power zone. Think bass guitar, kick drum, gives you that warmth, that punch. But here's the thing: too much energy down here. Your whole mix can just turn into this muddy, indistinct mess.
Oh yeah, I know that sound.
Mm-hmm.
It's like trying to hear someone talk in a really boomy room, right? Mm-hmm. Everything just kind of blurs together down there. So what's the typical fix for that low-end rumble?
Exactly. So for that bass guitar, to help it cut through but not totally dominate, you might find yourself making a little cut, maybe around 50 to 80 hertz. It's subtle, but it cleans out that real low mud that actually hides the bass's impact sometimes. Then maybe a little bump, a slight boost around 100 hertz or so can give it that nice, satisfying punch. The key really is subtlety. Small tweaks down here can make a huge difference in clarity.
Wow, okay, so sometimes you literally have to remove something to actually add impact. That's kind of cool. So after the lows, where are we heading next on this sonic map?
Okay, next up we move into the mid frequencies. This is a really big range, like 250 hertz all the way up to about 4 kilohertz. This is where most instruments really find their body and their presence. Mm-hmm. Vocals, guitars, snares, keys, a lot lives here, which also means, unfortunately, this is often where clarity issues pop up just because there's so much going on in this zone.
I bet. Yeah, with all those instruments kind of fighting for the same space, it's easy for things to get crowded, right?
Yeah.
It was like a classic example of mid-range clash.
A really common one is when your electric guitar and your main vocal are kind of stepping on each other's toes. So if the guitar feels like it's masking the vocal a bit, instead of just reaching for the fader, try a gentle cut on the guitar track. Maybe around 300 to 500 hertz. Often, that carves out just enough space for the vocal to step forward and be clear, but without making the guitar sound thin or losing its core richness. You're not killing the guitar, just, nudging it aside a bit.
That's super practical. It really is about making room for everyone, isn't it? Like sonic real estate. And then finally, we get up to the high end, that sparkle everyone's always chasing.
Exactly. The high frequencies, generally from 4 kilohertz up to 20 kilohertz. This is where you get all that brightness, that feeling of air definition. Think about the crisp tick of hi-hats, the shimmer of cymbals, or just the clarity in how someone pronounces words in a vocal. But word of warning, and this is also where you can easily overdo it, boosting too much up here. That can lead to a sound that's harsh, kind of brittle, and just fatiguing to listen to.
Right, like adding way too much salt. Just makes it unpleasant. So what's a smart way to get that sparkle without the harshness, without making it sound piercing?
Well, for vocals, sometimes a gentle, wide boost, maybe centered around 10 kilohertz, can add that lovely sparkle, make them feel more present, more airy. Mm-hmm. But you absolutely have to listen carefully for sibilance. That harsh isis sound, it can be super annoying if it gets out of control. And sometimes, it's not even about boosting. Sometimes it's about finding the exact frequency that's causing the harshness and just gently cutting that frequency instead.
Okay, it really sounds like EQ is way less about just grabbing knobs randomly and more about like deeply understanding how sounds occupy space and how they interact. So by manipulating these different ranges, you're not just tweaking volume, you're kind of crafting this balanced sonic picture where every element gets its own spotlight.
That's exactly it, yeah, making sure every instrument has its own little pocket in the mix.
Okay, so if understanding those broad frequency ranges is like having the map, then parametric EQ, that's your surgical tool, right? This is where things get really interesting, especially when you need to zoom in on a specific problem or maybe highlight a really cool characteristic in a sound. Unlike, those simpler graphic EQs with their fixed bands, a parametric EQ gives you insane flexibility. You can pick the exact frequency you want to mess with, you control how wide or narrow that adjustment is the Q factor, and then you boost or cut. That's real precision.
Yeah, what makes parametric EQ so indispensable, really, is that ability to just pinpoint the exact little frequency range that's either causing an issue or maybe just needs a gentle lift. Like imagine a vocal track, and there's just this subtle low-mid muddiness you can't quite shake. With the parametric EQ, you can sweep around, find that specific problem frequency, maybe it's a weird resonance around, say, 250 hertz, and just apply a very narrow, gentle cut right there. It cleans up that specific mud without messing up the rest of the vocal's tone. It's like taking a tiny little speck of dust off a photo without smudging the whole thing. Oh, I love that analogy, yeah. That's a laser beam versus a paint roller. I definitely remember when I first started, I'd just grab whatever EQ was there and make these huge, wide changes and then wonder why my mix suddenly sounded kind of weird or worse.
Right. That's such a common thing when you're starting out. Parametric EQ helps you avoid that. Let's think about guitars for a sec. You can use it to find that instrument's sweet spot, Maybe boosting a bit around 3 to 5 kilohertz can really help an electric guitar slice through a busy mix, give it that presence without just cranking the volume. Or conversely, if your guitar track sounds kind of boxy or maybe a bit muffled, you might find a slight cut and attenuation somewhere around 200 to 400 hertz just opens it right up beautifully.
That makes total sense. It's really about shaping the tone, not just brute force boosting. And what about when two instruments are really fighting for space, like that classic bass and kick drum battle down low? Can parametric EQ help them, play nice?
Oh, absolutely. It's fantastic for carving out those specific little pockets. Take that classic bass guitar and kick drum clash, often happening somewhere in that 60 to 100 hertz zone. You could apply a gentle, maybe narrow cut in that range on the bass guitar track, and then maybe give a tiny, subtle boost to the same frequency on the kick drum. What you're doing is creating this little frequency notch for the kick drum's attack to punch through the sustained bass note. It ensures each one shines without just fighting for attention. It's a really fundamental technique used all the time in, say, live band recordings to make sure instruments complement each other, leading to a mix that's cohesive and dynamic.
Wow. So the sheer versatility and that pinpoint precision make parametric EQ a seriously powerful ally. You're not just turning things up or down, you're meticulously sculpting each sound so it fits just right in the whole picture. Like having a precision scalpel in your mixing toolkit, for sure. Okay, now let's talk about something that can absolutely plague a mix and just make it sound amateurish, honestly. Frequency masking. This isn't so much a tightrope balance as it is like trying to listen to 5 people talking at once in a noisy room. It happens when different instruments or vocals have energy in the same frequency areas, and they basically just cover each other up. Makes it incredibly hard for the listener to pick out individual elements. This is probably the biggest reason for mixes sounding muddy or unclear.
Yeah, it's like the silent killer of clarity, seriously.
Yeah.
And the first step in fighting it is just identifying where it's actually happening. A really practical tip: solo tracks in pairs, or maybe small groups. Listen specifically for where they seem to step on each other. That bass guitar and kick drum example. They're notorious competitors down in the low end. And for a visual aid, which can be super helpful, use a spectrum analyzer plugin. It literally shows you the frequency content, highlighting those overlaps that might be causing trouble. It really guides your EQ moves.
So you're not just guessing with your ears, especially if you're still training them like I was for ages. You can actually see the problem areas. That's huge.
Exactly. And once you've spotted that overlap, one of the most effective things you can do is just apply a slight cut in one instrument's frequency range, specifically to make room for the other. So if your kick and bass are battling it out around, say, 100 hertz, you can carve out a gentle, maybe fairly narrow notch on the bass guitar right at that frequency. That tiny little tweak lets the kick's punch really cut through without you having to make the kick way louder or sacrifice the bass's overall impact. It's all about giving each element its own dedicated little sonic lane to drive in.
That's brilliant. It's like giving each instrument its own little sonic bubble, right? Making sure they all have a clear voice.
Precisely. And, for more complex situations, you can even get into things like sidechain compression, sometimes paired with dynamic EQs. That's where you'd set up a compressor on, let's say, the bass track, but the compressor is triggered by the signal from the kick drum track. So every time the kick hits, the bass volume dips just slightly, just for a moment, just enough to let that kick transient punch through cleanly. Now, gotta add a word of caution here. This needs finesse. You don't want it to sound unnatural or create obvious pumping artifacts in your mix. It should ideally be pretty subtle, almost imperceptible.
Okay, so it sounds like really understanding the unique frequency fingerprint of your tracks is step one. And then just experimenting is crucial because every mix is different, right? But with practice, learning to hear and avoid frequency masking becomes kind of second nature. And that's a massive step towards getting those crisp, clear, professional-sounding mixes where everything has its place. All right, have you ever listened to your favorite tracks? The ones that just sound amazing and wondered how they got everything so polished and balanced? Like you listen and think, man, how do they get that vocal to sit perfectly? Or how does that bass punch through with such clarity but not overwhelm anything? Well, a big part of the secret often lies in a technique called EQ matching, using reference tracks. And honestly, this can be an absolute game changer. It kind of gives you a roadmap to that pro sound you're chasing.
It really is like having a sonic blueprint, yeah. Basically, EQ matching means analyzing the overall frequency balance, the spectrum of a professionally mixed, commercially released track that you like, and then you apply similar EQ settings or curves to your own mix. Now, crucially, it's not about just copying it exactly note for note. It's more about using their sonic blueprint as inspiration. Think of it like having a really experienced mentor kind of guiding your hand, showing you what a balanced, clear sound can sound like in your specific genre.
Okay, so it's not cheating. It's more like guided learning. That makes sense. But how do you actually do it? Do you need fancy software?
The actual steps are pretty straightforward. First, you got to pick a good reference track. Make sure it's well mixed and, importantly, in the same genre or style as the track you're working on. Then you import that reference track into your DAW right alongside your own mix project. Next, you typically use specialized plugins designed for this. Tools like Isotope's Ozone has a Match EQ module, or FabFilter Pro Q can do it too. There are others. These tools analyze the frequency spectrum of your reference track and then generate an EQ curve that tries to mimic its overall tonal balance.
Whoa, that sounds incredibly powerful. But maybe a little dangerous too. Like, what if you just slap that curve on and it makes your track sound totally weird, just not like your track anymore?
You are absolutely right to be cautious there. That's the key thing. It is crucial to apply that generated EQ curve with care and with your ears wide open. Remember, every single track, every song is unique. While reference tracks give you amazing guidance, they should never dictate your entire mix. You absolutely have to listen critically. Does applying this curve actually improve your sound? Does it still feel authentic to your song, your vision? You'll probably need to make adjustments, maybe dial back the intensity of the curve or tweak specific bands. Ensure your mix keeps its own identity, its own character, its inspiration, right? Not rigid imitation.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Can you get maybe a quick specific example? Like, how might this actually play out in a real mixing situation?
For sure. Let's say you're mixing a pop vocal. You find a big hit pop song that has a similar vocal quality, similar production style. You use an EQ matching tool to analyze how they handled the frequencies on that pro vocal. You might notice, for instance, a particular boost in the high-end air frequencies or maybe a subtle scoop in the low mids to remove boxiness. You can then take those insights, not necessarily the exact curve itself, but the ideas behind it, and apply similar thinking to your own vocal EQ. Maybe you add a similar gentle air boost or try a similar mid scoop. It helps you achieve that kind of clarity and separation you admire in the reference, making your vocals really shine. So using references isn't just mimicking, it's actively learning the principles that make successful mixes work.
That's a fantastic way to think about it. Awesome. Okay, so what does all this boil down to for you, practically? Sitting there in your home studio, let's try to distill everything we've talked about into some essential EQ tips, your ultimate cheat sheet for getting better mixes.
Right. First off, just remember, think of EQ as kind of like a magic wand for your mix. But it's a smart wand, okay? It's not just about making things louder or quieter. It's fundamentally about shaping the tone of your individual tracks, helping each element fit perfectly into the overall sonic jigsaw puzzle without, overlapping and obscuring the others. It's about creating a clear picture, not just a louder noise.
And what about all that low-end gunk, the mud we keep mentioning? I know that used to drive me crazy.
Yeah, that's where high-pass filters, or HPFs, are your absolute best friends.
Yes.
Use them wisely. HPFs are amazing for just removing unnecessary low-frequency energy from instruments that really don't need it down there. For example, putting a high-pass filter on your vocals, your guitars, maybe even some snare drums or overheads. It can drastically clean up your mix. It gets rid of that low rumble and boominess that you might not even consciously hear on its own, but that collectively eats up headroom and makes the whole mix feel muddy. It's such a simple move, but it yields huge improvements in clarity.
Right. Like sonic housekeeping. Just sweeping the floor, getting rid of the dust you don't need. And you still need to know, generally, where each instrument kind of lives in the frequency world, right?
No, absolutely. Identify frequency ranges. Know your neighborhoods. Every instrument has its sort of home base in the frequency spectrum. Understanding where they typically live is just crucial for making smart EQ decisions. Like we said, your kick drum usually has its power down around 50, 100 hertz. The core clarity of a vocal might be more prominent around 1, 3 kilohertz. By knowing these general ranges, you can use your EQ much more effectively to carve out specific space for each element, reducing that overlap and fighting that dreaded muddiness we keep circling back to.
Okay, this next one feels kind of counterintuitive when you first hear it, but man, it was a total game changer for me. Cut before you boost.
It really is transformative. When you reach for that EQ, try to make it your default mindset to consider cutting frequencies before you even think about boosting others. If a track sounds muddy or harsh, or maybe just a bit honky or wrong somehow, your first instinct should be, can I reduce the frequencies that are causing this problem? Like, if a guitar sounds way too hard or kind of nasal, often a gentle cut somewhere around 2-4 kilohertz can actually soften it and make it sit way better in the mix, much more effectively than trying to boost the low end or something else to compensate. This approach usually leads to a much more natural, cleaner sound overall. Plus, it helps you avoid accidentally pushing levels into distortion, which can happen easily with aggressive boosting.
Love that one. And finally, maybe the most important tip of all, because ultimately it's all about your music, your sound, and your ears.
Exactly. Experiment and trust your ears. Look, while all these tips and techniques we've discussed give you a fantastic foundation, you got to remember that EQ is as much an art form as it is a science. Maybe more so sometimes. The absolute best EQ decisions, they're always going to come from your personal touch, your creative intuition, and what genuinely sounds right to you in the specific context of the song you're working on. Every track is unique, every mix has its own goals, so let your ears be your ultimate guide. Don't be afraid to experiment.
Wow, what a journey we've taken today. We really have gone deep into mastering track equalization. We started right at the beginning, exploring that fundamental frequency spectrum, diving into the lows, the mids, the highs, really understanding their roles and how you can sculpt them for maximum impact and clarity.
Yeah, and we dug into powerful tools like parametric EQs, showing you how you can use them almost surgically, cutting out those unnecessary frequencies, strategically boosting the ones that define the unique character of your sounds, and using those essential tools like high-pass filters for cleaning things up, preventing muddiness, and always remember, context is everything. What works brilliantly for a snare drum in one track might be totally wrong in another. Your ears have got to be the final judge.
For sure. So now really it's time for you to take action. This isn't just stuff to know, it's stuff to do. Dive into your DAW, put on your good headphones or fire up your monitors and just start playing around with those EQ settings on your tracks. Listen really intently. Pay close attention to how even small adjustments can make a really big difference. You will hear the transformation in your mixes with your own ears. It's pretty exciting when it clicks.
Totally. And here's maybe a final thought to chew on as you go. Think about those legendary EQ moves on iconic albums you love. They weren't just about technical precision or following some formula. They always balanced that sharp technical knowledge with a really strong artistic intuition, a vision for the sound. So as you're refining your own EQ skills, keep asking yourself, how can my unique artistic vision, the specific sound I'm going for, guide my technical EQ adjustments to make my music truly connect and resonate with listeners?
That's a fantastic question to leave you with. Seriously, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into mastering track equalization. Keep exploring, keep creating, keep learning, and remember our motto, home recording made easy.